and welcome to Business in a New Normal. And purpose of our podcast here is to share balanced and objective information with our listeners to help you make more informed decisions as we move through these crazy times that we're going through now. We really truly believe that it's more than just surviving in this time, it's thriving in this time. We talk to guests all the time that are doing amazing in their businesses during the pandemic. And a lot of times it's as simple as seeing a new perspective or having a new idea to move forward with. I'm Joseph Rosales, and this is my co-host, Ike Devji. Hi, Ike. How you doing?
Good morning. Good to see you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you. And we have an amazing guest with us today, Ericka Adler, and we're going to talk to her in a minute, and we'll go through a more formal introduction of her in a minute. Ericka, how are you?
Great, thanks. Nice to be here.
So Ike is a asset protection attorney. He specializes in helping to protect the net worth and financial wellness of businesses and people all across the country. He's very busy with that. We have a LinkedIn group called Business in the New Normal. You should check that out and see some amazing articles and really important information that we post almost weekly there. I am the founder of a firm that specializes in helping companies to improve the performance of their leaders, managers, and teams. So together we have some pretty unique perspectives on business. We're constantly helping our clients to improve operations and improve their performance of their businesses. So we always like to start with what's going on in your world of law, and maybe we can share for a few minutes what's going on and some top of mind things.
Sure. Thank you, Joseph. A lot of different things going on, as we've been mentioning for the last couple of months. People are getting ready for perceived significant changes to the estate tax regime. So people are worried about that. They're making changes on that at year end. They're working on transactional issues. They are preparing for the continued hardship ahead. There is certainly light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine, but by the time the vaccine is really, the way most experts are putting a time frame together, by the time it's distributed and enough of the population has been vaccinated to restore consumer confidence, different economists, scientists, logistical people are saying that we're looking at a window of a year to 2 years ahead to get us back to the new norm, the old normal, or some semblance of consumer confidence. So we have a lot of people getting ready simultaneously for some tough times ahead in the short term and some increased prosperity in the long term. So they are looking at how do we survive until that point, and when that point of normalcy returns to business, how are we going to be equipped to provide the services or the goods or the facilities that we've always done in the past. So really unusual combination of both crisis planning and growth planning going on at the same time.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, we talk about planning and most people want to react to what's happening out there. And unfortunately, that usually ends up being too late because there's an impact to everything out there. I know that you posted an article, and I think it was called Employers Facing Tough Choices as COVID-19 Vaccine Rollout Nears. And that's in our site, Business in the New Normal on LinkedIn. And it's really interesting because as I read that earlier, I think it was yesterday, it really is complicated when you talk about employers who are going to possibly want to require their employees to have a vaccine. Now, a recent Pew study said that about 51% of people right now surveyed would take a vaccine, which means 49% won't. That's a huge part of the population. And as we move forward through this and everybody talks about the vaccine and how great it is, if half the people don't take it, that's going to be an issue with trying to accomplish what people are trying to accomplish with a vaccine. But at the same time, employers have some liability if they mandate their employees to take a vaccine. And if somebody, for whatever reasons, religious or health reasons, doesn't want to take a vaccine, there's an issue. But secondly, and I read in the report, if somebody takes the vaccine and they become sick or they have adverse reactions to it, what does that mean to the employer? And so there's all these complicated things. It's not as simple as everybody takes a shot and we're all good again. There's a whole bunch of layers here. And I'm sure probably Ericka, you might even have some comments about that during our conversation with her, but it's not done. This onion continues to peel, and we continue to see, wow, this is very complicated. And whether you're on the right or the left, whether you're a mask wearer or not mask wearer, I mean, we have both flavors, right? And everybody in between. But we also see that, with mask, it's kind of easy to tell somebody's got a mask on. Somebody doesn't have a mask on. That's visual. But the vaccine, it's going to be a whole different game, because how do you know if people took a vaccine or didn't? And you have to card people when they walk in. Are they going to, there's some science behind this. They're saying they might mark the vaccine so that way they can scan you and know you have it. That's really way out there for in the science world. So
Well,
yeah, it's really interesting.
Your comment about carding people is interesting, because I have seen some news reports saying that vaccine or proof of vaccination may be required to access certain places or services, maybe to get on a plane or to attend a certain kind of event. And frankly, that may encourage people to comply. And obviously we all understand consumers' hesitation. I mean, there are people who are hesitant about taking a new vaccine who are not anti-vaxxers, right?
Right.
That's one hardcore political, social, ideological group that is simply opposed to the idea of any vaccine.
Right.
And then there are people who are simply educated and have followed the course of medicine over the history of the United States, where we've seen significant drug side effects, including from vaccines in the past, and nobody wants to be first.
Right.
And I think a lot of the people that I'm talking to, including many of the physicians that I'm talking to, they're all on board in terms of taking it. And what they have said to me is, don't be first, but don't be last.
Interesting. Yeah. So more to come on this, because it's going to unfold in front of us over the next 3, 6, 12 months. And as we've seen with something as divisive as mask or no mask, we're going to see some interesting things, and I'm going to be happy that we're going to be reporting on this as we go forward. And we may even have some special guests with specialized knowledge about this come on to the program to share as well. But so yeah, it's interesting. Happy holidays to everybody. We're moving forward. Everybody's doing their Christmas shop, and houses are decorated, and vaccine is coming for some. So it's going to be interesting. I don't want to take much more time from your guest this morning. I know she's got some really, really relevant, important information to share with our listeners. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ike, and you can do the introduction of Ericka, and then maybe get started on the conversation.
Excellent. Well, I'm very pleased that Ericka was able to join us this morning. Our guest today is Ericka Adler. She's an attorney and a partner with Roetzel and Andrus, a Chicago law firm, but she works with clients all over the country. Ericka has over 20 years of experience in a variety of areas of law, including health law, corporate compliance, corporate transactional law, M&A work, and cybersecurity and data privacy. Her work is broad in its scope and very technical. Ericka is a prolific writer and has written a number of articles, which is actually how she and I first came into contact. As I had been following Ericka's work, and I think she'd mentioned that she follows some of mine as well. And she has some really excellent pieces that she's put out on very technical legal issues in plain English that consumers can easily use to understand and help manage their understanding and the information they need on some complex topics. So I'm glad to have Ericka here. Ericka is here today to talk to us about a lot of different things and a few very specific things that I thought and Joseph thought were important, not the least of which is the legal issues surrounding remote workforces. And in particular, the compliance and data security issues and information security issues that go along with that. With all of us working at home, if not full-time, at least partially, um, the formality around our computers, our computer systems, the privacy that we have in conversations when we might be in a Zoom recording or a Zoom meeting with a client, how documents are being stored, all of these things are important issues. And Ericka really did a great job at breaking a lot of these things down. And it's a pleasure. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Ericka.
Hi, well, it's great to be here and I'm happy to talk about this topic. I'll explain a little bit about my background in the sense that I work with physicians and physician practices across the country. So I'm really used to lecturing to that type of audience about what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong in the sense of everyday legal obligations. And HIPAA is a really big one. And obviously, when we're talking about big institutions like hospitals, insurance companies, et cetera, they have a full team that helps them with these things. And, you know, and they don't even get everything right all the time either, right? But when it comes to physician practices in particular, they really have struggled during this COVID period because we had to make this transition really quickly. And many of them, I'll be honest, weren't doing things right to begin with and are probably doing things even less correctly now that they have people working from home. And not just, it could be employers, it could be physician practices, other types of healthcare organizations. So I think what we want to think about here is who is covered by HIPAA, right? And that's a really interesting topic because as you were talking about, you know, the spread of COVID and people who wear masks and don't wear masks, et cetera, a lot of the arguments we hear as well, you know, HIPAA doesn't allow you to make me wear a mask or to ask me what my medical condition is. And it just goes to show there's a really huge misunderstanding about what HIPAA is.
Yeah.
HIPAA applies to covered entities, and a very basic understanding of what a covered entity is a medical practice, right? It collects medical information from patients. It talks about medical issues with patients. It sends medical information to billing companies. It shares medical information with other physicians to which the patient is referred. So it's a really good, if you have to kind of understand what a covered entity is think about a medical practice. It's really just the most basic for the average person to really understand. The guy working at a Walgreens who asks you to wear a mask is not violating HIPAA, you know, by doing that. And I think that's important for everybody to really understand what HIPAA is. So in the general sense of a medical practice, we do have these obligations, and the obligation is to keep medical information private. And there are exceptions, of course, billing, healthcare operations, things like dealing with a billing company, an insurance company, et cetera. And of course, treatment is an exception. So if you're being referred to a specialist, sharing that information with the specialist is not going to be a HIPAA issue. But every other circumstance requires that the patient give that permission. And that's why we have a HIPAA authorization form. So if you've ever asked to have your complete record transferred or get a copy of your record, et cetera, to allow it to be used for research or marketing, et cetera, you're supposed to give that permission. So just as a general background to what HIPAA is. So within the office setting, there are some precautions that are supposed to be taken. So, you know, when you used to go to the doctor's office, they would call your name out really loudly. And then when HIPAA first came about, you know, it was secret. You'd write it down on a notepad, and they would go around and say, you know, are you Ericka? Are you Ericka? You know, now it's like, I think people have relaxed a little bit, but the general idea is that you don't make public information about who the people sitting in the waiting room are, you know, what they're there for, et cetera. And I can tell you over the years, I've had just many HIPAA issues in terms of that not being honored. And, you know, we try and hone those. They used to have, you know, barriers. So when you're checking in, nobody besides you can hear you. And we've really relaxed that, but I think people are conscious of it. When you go into a doctor's office, you're supposed to be given a copy of their notice of privacy practices. And really, to be honest, I can't remember the last time any doctor I went to actually did that, but you still usually sign something saying that you got it, right? Nobody questions it. I used to, just to be difficult, ask about that, but given up on it. So the idea is that that's one precaution. The other ones that are taken are making sure that you're storing information on your computers properly, password protection, so that you're changing it fairly often, not sharing passwords, that people have access to the limited information necessary to do their job. So for example, if you work with a practice that shares any kind of portal with a hospital, and you try and go in and look up information about a patient that's not designated as being a patient of the practice, you will immediately get a call. The practice will get a call as having violated their HIPAA policies. And that's happened to many of my practices, curious employees wanting to look up another employee who went to the emergency room. You're not allowed to do it. And the technology really allows them to really catch those perpetrators, so to speak. So things like that, and within the office setting, it's much easier to meet the technical requirements. Usually practices will have policies in place. They'll have had somebody come in and look at the technical aspects of their system. They'll make sure that access is, even whether remote or on site, is protected. So there's all these safeguards that are in place. And just to kind of veer us towards our topic today is what happens when suddenly you're sending your workforce home, right? Even myself, I often have HIPAA information if I'm doing an audit or working on an issue related to a patient with one of my clients. I sign a business associate agreement with my practices that I work for, and I have access to their information. So on a daily basis, I am remote from them, and I take certain precautions. I make sure that anything that goes back and forth is encrypted, of course. If I have to print something out, I'm shredding it in my office. But look at me, I'm working from home now. So is my connection to my office as secure as it used to be? It's reasonably secure. It's not the same as an on-site system. So when you're working in a building and everybody's on a closed system, it's much more secure than working via VPN. But of course, VPN, which is what they recommend as a reasonable alternative, is much more than regular Gmail, right?
Right.
So there's been varying security levels that are taken, and we've had to adjust. So when practices first sent their staff home, or hospitals said, billers, you can work from home, or insurance companies let their marketing people work from home, everybody is suddenly spread out and they're at their homes. And the question is, what should those practices have done? Well, what are the risks that are being taken? There's some really obvious ones. The first one I just mentioned, which is the transmission of information. They recommend you use VPN lines if you're not. Some people are, some people aren't. Some people have encrypted emails, some don't. And so practices were really jumping in to try and sign up with vendors that could help them do that. Telemedicine, of course, became huge. Everybody's signing up. I must have looked at 100 telemedicine contracts as all my practices out there were trying to get signed up. And, some telemedicine providers are better than others. But one of the nice things about HIPAA during the period of COVID, if there's anything nice about this period, is of course the increase in telemedicine use and the relaxation of the HIPAA rules as it related to telemedicine. And just so we all understand, that relaxation had to do with the fact that the government said, hey, you know what? Where we used to only let you talk via a secure conference from a secure location, we're going to let you use other types of devices so you can talk securely. Doesn't mean every device was okay. I know they said no to TikTok, no to Facebook Live and stuff like that, but they really relaxed it so people were able to use their cell phones now to talk to their doctors directly. Unfortunately, a lot of people interpreted those relaxation of the rules as meaning HIPAA was gone, or during COVID, you didn't have to worry about HIPAA. And so we became very lax in terms of the precautions that were being taken. People, for example, were using their laptops or their computers at home to log in, let's say, to the system, but maybe that's the same computer that they let their kids use for school, or they let their friends use when needed. And were they logging out? Were there security measures to make sure that if somebody unauthorized went in, that they couldn't see what was there? Maybe they were letting somebody borrow their laptop and take it out off the premises. They didn't really know what was being done with it, and it got lost. So these kinds of events occurred. I've heard some terrible stories about, teenagers or others kind of seeing information about their parents who might have been doctors, about patients in the community, et cetera, and spreading that information, not, intentionally, not intentionally. Oh, guess what? I saw my mom was talking to so-and-so. Do you know that she has cancer? Do you know that she's pregnant? Things like that, which are totally inappropriate, but it happens in a setting where there aren't clear rules. People are very casual. So things like password, access to devices, even information that's printed out. I mean, you have a stack of papers on your desk. What in the workplace, we would typically have a shredder, or somebody would come and pick that up and shred it. In my own office, I have a stack of papers. I went out and bought a shredder. So it's not just the physician worker, that are having this issue, but anybody with access to that information had to make plans. Really, though, whose responsibility is it? It's really the employer's responsibility, who is the covered entity, because if somebody's going to get in trouble, it's the covered entity. They're going to get fined, they're going to get investigated. So hopefully a lot of these employers started coming up with very clear policies. Who are the employees that are going to be working remotely? What access do they need? What devices are they using? How secure is their method of accessing the information? What protocols have we put in place about who can access the device, how often the password is changed, whether they can print things out, what they're doing with things that they printed out? So these are all policies that really needed to be put together for any covered entity that was having remote workers. And
Okay,
that's,
this is a great points you've made, and you've made a bunch of great points in a row that I think we're going to have to help unpack. Now, you've talked about some of these issues in the context of the medical practice world, which obviously is a big glaring one, especially where it comes to HIPAA. But it's certainly even in the medical industry, not just related to doctors' offices, right? There are lots of other healthcare entities. It could be home healthcare businesses. It could be like a residential care facility, or a DME company, or a hospice, or an MRI facility, or a surgery center. So it's not just doctors' offices that have this concern, right? The HIPAA standard applies to any of these entities that have that HIPAA information, correct?
correct. Well, so a covered entity is an entity that's billing electronically. So absolutely, home health cares, MRI, et cetera. But depending on the type of entity it is, it may or may not have experienced a change in its operations, right? So a home health care that has visiting nurses and doctors, et cetera, they probably didn't change too much during COVID. They were set with their devices, same encryption, they probably didn't change all that much. DME companies, et cetera. So really the people that were really impacted during COVID were ones that did all their work exclusively in an office setting, and suddenly were doing it exclusively in a different kind of setting. So I would say it really disproportionately affected physician practices and those kind of office-based businesses like that.
Well, that certainly makes sense, and it's important that that we say to our viewers that, look, we're talking about some of these issues in the context of your expertise with healthcare law, but all of these privacy issues and really apply to almost every business, especially any business that has any personal identifying information, any business that takes payments, any business that handles confidential information. So that could include you and I, obviously, as attorneys. It would include CPAs who maybe have financial information. I can think of a whole bunch of different kinds of businesses and consultants and employees that have information that in one way or the other is confidential and should be protected. So many of the specifics that you've already shared with us and that we're going to ask you some more questions on really apply to every business. For instance, if you have an auto dealership and you have people doing finance deals at home, then whatever they're looking at, whatever social security numbers, credit statements, income statements, disclosures that they're looking at, if you're in the mortgage business and working from home, I mean, all of these people have very significant amounts of confidential information that they have some liability for protecting, even if none of it is HIPAA.
Absolutely. Every industry has its own guidelines for that. And I'll also mention sometimes there's secondary industries. So for example, in healthcare, which is where I work, anybody who does business with a covered entity is also subject to those same rules. So it extends out. So if I am a doctor practice and I hired an IT person to work on my computer, I usually have them sign something. So if they're now working from home, they have my information. If they're subcontracting to somebody, then that's also going to be covered by HIPAA. So it also spreads out. And, you know, certainly in other industries as well, hopefully they get that in writing, but we pass on that liability downstream when we work with vendors or others to perform our services.
So what are some of the basic security protocols you're advising your clients to take for devices that their employees are using at home? Can you give us 4 or 5 bullet points on if I own a business and am sending or have staff at home, what are some of the most basic things that you are advising me to do in order to affirmatively show that I have taken steps to protect my client's information? And I'm thinking proactively here. What is our affirmative defense, right?
Right.
To a
Well, I
client.
mean, the first thing we recommend is that we prefer that employer-controlled devices are used, so we can see, you know, what software is on there, who has accessed it, when it's been accessed, and then if something happens where it's stolen or taken, it can be wiped. You know, that's a very easy process. Unfortunately, many employers that would be a big expense. So, you know, to the extent it can be done, we recommend that. Of course, login and password access should be limited for employees, and two-factor authentication would be appropriate as well. So somebody's not trying to log in from a different device to get, you know, access to a privileged portal or something like that. We also want to limit access only to what the person in their particular role should have access to. That's a big mistake that employers make. You know, everybody's got a password, everybody can get in, but, you know, a nurse practitioner needs access to an entire medical record, while a biller really just needs access to the patient name, address, date of service, and maybe, you know, what the condition is, you know, less information. And I think giving too much information creates a huge risk for employers when it comes to healthcare. Having clear policies about what to do with devices when they're not being used. Maybe you provide a lot of employers are providing filing cabinets that can be locked, and that's where the device goes. For some reason, some employers were letting people store them in their cars and they were getting stolen. So that makes no sense to me. So locking them up. And then simple things like either picking up paperwork that can be shredded or buying a shredder for employees to have at home. They're not expensive. That can be done. So basically that way we're covering the device where the information is, access to the device, protection of the device, and then what to do with information that's actually printed. And I think those are really the main steps.
And those are really good, specific, actionable tips. Thank you for sharing those, because I'm hearing, okay, so if you can supply the device so you can control what's on it and monitor what's on it, be able to wipe it, make sure it's securely stored, make sure that you're giving them a way to do that if they don't have that. So those are some really good, specific things that, you know, business owners, I think, often need lists of compliance issues. So that's really helpful. What if work software is being used on a device in the home where other family members or friends might have access to the device? So let's assume I'm a business owner who can't or hasn't supplied my remote workers with the computer or the tablet or whatever it is they're using, because this is not just about the PC or the laptop. There are lots of different ways to access business information. If we, the employer, are not supplying that device and they're logging in or using software on that, what are some of the basic things? You've talked a little bit about passwords and limits on what they can access. You've talked about two-factor authentication for login security. What are some of the other controls we should be thinking about when folks are using their own equipment at home?
Well, I think, you know, we need to have policies and procedures in place, and this is where training comes in. And unfortunately, when it comes to HIPAA, a lot of it is reliance on the good faith kind of cooperation of the particular employee. So the rules should be you log out immediately when you're done. You do not leave a device unattended. You store it properly. Those kinds of things are really the only ways to do it. You should not be letting others use, when possible, those devices, but I understand at home in that setting where you're using a personal device, that may not be possible. The other thing I'll mention is that a lot of the sharing of private information happens verbally. So a doctor having a telemedicine session, billing company talking to a patient about their bill. You mentioned some other companies where they might be talking about financial information on the phone, etc. And it's really hard, and this has been a challenge in the home setting, if you don't have your own private office, right, to not be overheard, to be able to have those confidential information not shared. So it's one thing if you hear a dog barking in the background, but it's another thing where you have somebody sitting right there hearing you tell Mrs. Smith, something very personal and private, just because you can't do your job, elsewhere. There's nowhere else to go. And so while we can talk about tablets and safety, there's also this other issue. It really is nothing we can do except ask, employees to try and find a quiet place to go. Maybe we can also make available headphones and perhaps microphones so people can talk more softly. So that's another element of protecting private information separate from the device that has been a real challenge as well. It's not quite as easily addressed.
That makes a lot of sense. And that you earlier brought up things like providing a locking file cabinet or providing a shredder. But yeah, the microphones and headsets and things like that makes a huge amount of sense, and seems to be a kind of the sort of glaring obvious solution to not having a private space, is to be able to at least limit partially what other people behind you are seeing or hearing by using those devices. So that's really good common sense tip that I think a lot of people are overlooking still, because we're used to the camera, the speakers, the ambient sound, the way I'm speaking to you now without wearing anything, the way you and Joseph and I are all speaking to each other. And yeah, a headset would give us all a significant additional degree of privacy. Talk to us a little bit about liability issues. If my employees tell me that the device is secured and that the kids aren't TikToking on it, and that they do have a shredder, and it turns out none of that is true, that's still on me, the employer, correct?
Absolutely. The employer is the one that's at risk of violating the law, the one who's at risk of being investigated by OCR, of paying those fines. And really, it's very hard because there is a lot of good faith. We often will do training and have the employees sign privacy or confidentiality agreements that require them to acknowledge what they've been taught and trained, acknowledge that they're complying with it. We often try and put penalties of sorts into documents, but really, I mean, if somebody puts you at risk like that, most likely they're going to be terminated for just violating your policies. But that doesn't help when you have to pay millions of dollars in fines, right? So there is definitely risk on the part of the employer, and there's no perfect way to do it. You're not making site visits to people's homes. All you can really do is maybe check in with them on a weekly basis about whether they're complying with the policies, ongoing training, ongoing reminders. There's going to be bad actors no matter what, and indifferent people regarding any policies, and that's definitely a big risk. Of course, as you know, there's insurance that we recommend for violations of HIPAA. This would be absolutely one of the most important types of insurance to have right now, because it's more likely than ever to occur. I will say that most, if not all, HIPAA violations really occur because somebody complains, right? The patients that received information by mistake about another patient, or somebody found private information in the garbage. So you need that complaint by somebody. And I think right now people are very likely to complain about just about
Mm.
everything. We got a lot of extra time on their hands, and
Mm.
so I think that risk is high right now for that to happen.
Well, and
I
I think
have a question. I have a question real quick. I'm sorry. You mentioned millions of dollars of fines, and I'm sure they escalate to that and more.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about a mortgage company or a financial services company, because those people are all working from home. My wife's in the mortgage,
Yeah.
so I see this all the time. What kind of liability could an employer who has 50 mortgage, advisors working from home, and they're probably most of them are in violation of some aspect of privacy? I mean, whether it's the laptop or not shredding or not filing in a locked cabin or whatever.
Right.
Are there fines for those things too? I mean, because it's personal financial information, everything from your social security number to how much money you make to your tax liabilities, all your tax returns. I mean, they're all there. Are
Right.
people at risk with that? Employers?
Well, I think I can probably answer that better than I can. I mean,
absolutely,
Wow.
Joseph. We have Ericka has focused a lot of her comments on HIPAA, which is the healthcare portion of that information. But even medical practices have a lot of protected information that has nothing to do with HIPAA. And Ericka touched on some of that. You just touched on some of that, right? So social security numbers, payment information, credit card numbers, checking account numbers, insurance billing information, anything that you're handling, including that information, if it is compromised in some way, you have that liability. The business owner has that liability. And that's true if we're talking about a mortgage company or if we're talking about a restaurant where an employee is skimming diners' credit card numbers. So that liability is there. And one of the issues that we talked about on a past episode of this show with insurance expert David Moore was the need for every business to consider the amount of data breach and cyber liability insurance coverage they have in place, which Ericka alluded to earlier as well. That is not a medical practice specific thing. So yeah, you bet, if I owned a real estate brokerage, if I owned a mortgage company, if I owned any business that took payment information or that had personal identifying information that could be used to steal somebody's identity, I would be concerned about my direct liability for handling this information.
Interesting.
absolutely.
Wow.
Right. And there's a lot of scams going on right now too.
Yeah.
I mean, in
wow.
Illinois, for some, I don't know if the Department of Employment Security database was hacked, but my firm and many of my clients have had received notices about claims having been filed, for unemployment due to termination. And none of these people have been terminated. So somebody seems to have gotten very specific information about where people worked and how much they were making, etc. And it's directly related to COVID because the system was so overwhelmed with unemployment claims as a result of the pandemic. So there's a lot, and I'm sure you've heard of some other ones going on. So right now, in
Rampant in
particular,
Arizona as well. The fake unemployment claims
Yep.
have been rampant in Arizona. And in fact, one of the recent articles I did for Physicians Practice, where we both write, was on the spike in identity theft that follows every recession. When we have a bunch of people unemployed, when we have a country that's in economic duress, fraud increases in every type, from porch pirates stealing your Amazon package to people stealing your identity. And this is a liability issue for every business out there. Now, one of the things that you talked about as a way for business owners to mitigate, when I said, look, if the employee's telling you that they're doing these things and they're not actually doing them,
right.
and what's the liability picture, and we talked through that a little bit, and you said you can't do site visits on every employee's home, right? It's not realistic.
Right.
So Joseph, this is where we need your help. Since you are a management and leadership expert, what are some of the things that you would and are talking to business owners about in terms of helping them retrain employees and make this mental shift to having a secure home workspace from which to conduct business and which represents the business. How would you approach this from a leadership perspective? How do you get people to get on board and take this seriously?
Well, that's a great question. And as Ericka was listing out all of the things that should be done, I've developed a small checklist here of 7 things so far that an employer should be conversing about, because ignorance is not an excuse. As you guys know, ignorance of the law is no excuse. It's not a defense. And if people don't know that they're supposed to do it, that's the first step. They can't do it. But if they know what they're supposed to do, and there's a checklist and there's a training, there's a conversation, and then there's constant reinforcement and checking in along the way, because out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, we talked about that 6 months ago or last year. I remember you said something about that. That doesn't cut it. You got to continue to reinforce it. And like any other habit, it takes, whether it's a security habit or a health habit or any kind of habit, we need to reinforce it and continue to talk about the importance of it. So as a leadership and management consultant, it starts with a conversation, but it starts with having all of the information. And I'm a big checklist person. I like, here's the 10 things you need to do. We need to talk about these things and how important they are, and then talk about the variables in each one of them. Simply locking your filing cabinet, great. You have a locking filing cabinet, but are you using it? Where do you keep the key? How often do you file? Do you file things, every day, or do you let them go for 3 weeks and then file them? Well, because there's an exposure. And with home invasions going up, and with people, there are more outlets now for people to get to monetize these stolen social security numbers and other credit cards than ever before.
Right.
15 years ago, what'd you do with it? You couldn't use the card and you got rid of it, but now you can sell it to somebody and they'll use it.
Right.
It's crazy how my son just got his car broken into, and he stopped his debit card like this, but unbeknownst to him, when my wife gave him his social security number, she never told him to put it away in a safe place. He kept it in his wallet.
Oh.
So now his social security number is in his wallet, and we've had to go through all of that stuff. And it's, oh my gosh, because there are people out there that'll buy that.
And you think people are pretty savvy. I mean, I think, doctors are a good example. They're really smart, but they're told, only use encrypted email, only use encrypted texting, but it's so cumbersome. And so they want to use and there's a scam right now where you get an email that looks like it's from somebody and they're like, hey, I need to talk to you. What's the best way to reach you? And it seems like it's one of your patient names and it's urgent. So you give them your cell phone. Next thing you know, you get a text, and then you're texting on your cell phone, and that's not secure. And perhaps you're giving information away. So there's so many avenues where you can be fooled, but a lot of it comes from not following specific policies because they seem cumbersome or too difficult. And technology is a great thing, but it's also our Achilles heel, right? Because it's the thing that brings us down at the same time. And it's a real challenge, and definitely right now is a difficult time in business.
I'd like to run something very specific by you, and I bet this is going to curl your hair a little bit as a healthcare and HIPAA attorney. So I have been receiving from CVS Minute Clinic information about my scheduled COVID test and form of text messages on my cell phone for 5 days. I am not signed up with CVS.
Wow.
I have never signed up with CVS or Minute Clinic, and I'm holding this up here. I don't know if it's actually visible.
I can see it.
Folks can see here all of these things, and I've said stop, remove, etc., etc.
Wow.
The latest one is down here at the very bottom, and I'm going to hold this up so hopefully it shows on camera. It says, the very bottom, your test results are ready.
Ooh.
Click here.
Wow.
And it has information. Now, this is going to allow me, presumably, to access somebody else's COVID test information.
Or it's a link that is a scam.
Or it's malicious, or the whole thing is malicious.
Right.
But it does have a CVS.com, at least in the link, in the last link, and it does have a phone number, which it appears to be a CVS phone number. I checked it. But these folks are unsolicited, sending me information about an appointment, and now apparently about someone's specific results. I'd just love to hear your reaction to this, and from your position doing what you do.
Right. Well, like I said, technology makes our lives easier in many ways, and we're using it for these kinds of things, particularly related to COVID and clinics and injections and everything. But this could just happen with, I get all the time about picking up prescriptions from Walgreens, right? Your prescription's ready. Do you want to refill, right? So the question is, how did this happen? Is it malicious and really not from them? Did somebody put in the digits of a phone number wrong? And you could see how very easily somebody with almost the same number really is waiting for that clinic appointment, right? So that part could be understood. But then to say that there's results, so is there a disconnect then between the person, maybe the person got the date of the appointment and then they were just following up with it via your phone. So they actually went for the appointment and now they still have the wrong number. So they're sending the wrong results. I mean, there's so many things that went
Or
wrong.
they never got results that they needed in order to attend a
Right.
family gathering or show up for work
Right.
or whatever the script.
And you're hearing
Well-
stories of people waiting days and days or not getting results at all. So you have to wonder, exactly if that's the case. I mean, so let's say somebody finds out that in fact they've been texting, their test results to you. I mean, that there is a HIPAA action right there.
Wow.
So it would lead to an investigation. Now they assess the harm, or how many people were impacted. They would then have to do kind of an audit and analysis of their procedures that are in place to prevent this, their safety checks, etc. So there's a whole process, but that's exactly that person that can complain. I'm guessing this was just human error maybe, and it's probably way more common than we expect. And I think people are forgiving a lot during this pandemic. But technically speaking, most likely it's a HIPAA issue.
So it is an actionable, I mean, in the technical sense, it's an actual actionable violation, you think?
People do not have an individual right to bring a claim. What they could do is let OCR know that they believe there's a HIPAA violation. OCR would then decide if they want to pursue it, right? So they can't bring a lawsuit or anything like that, obviously, against CVS, MinuteClinic, or anything like that. The other interesting thing is, and I don't know, I mean, I think you understand, I don't know how it is in Arizona, but most of these clinics, like the Walgreens and the CVS clinics, they're called CVS clinics or Walgreens clinics, whatever, but actually they're individually owned professional corporations in many states that have corporate practice of medicine, right? So because in those states, a company like Walgreens or CVS can't own a medical practice. They can't practice medicine. So if you ever go into one of the Minute clinics, they'll have like a certificate on the wall with the actual name of the entity and who the doctor is that owns it for them and everything like that. So when who is actually the party violating the law here? Is it really CVS, or what, that clinic name is licensed to the actual corporation in many states? So it creates a lot of different issues. One of them may have just created a HIPAA issue for the other, and that's where those business associate relationships come in as well. So pretty complex, but what are you going to do? You're going to just
and it's
respond?
another good lesson for the business owners that that we speak to every week, is that you do need to thoroughly vet your vendors and partners, and you do carry significant liability for their actions and how they're handling information for you, for your customers, and when representing you. And this idea of these associate relationships being a liability shield, I think sometimes business owners are wearing the emperor's new clothes when they say, oh, well, we outsource that. That's not my liability. And we very often remind people that, hey, that's your subcontractor on your job in some respect. And the buck is going to stop with you. And then from the client's perspective, where Joseph spends a lot of time, if I'm the client, I don't care. I came to you. I came to your office.
Right.
The fact that you hired somebody or subcontracted a service to somebody that dropped the ball is not my problem. It's your problem, because my relationship is with you.
And that's where those indemnification provisions come in really handy, right? in your business associate agreements and your other contracts, and totally different topic. But when it comes to a HIPAA violation, if you did everything right and somebody who works for you is the one that messed up, that's going to be the only thing that saves you. And I'm really surprised sometimes to see business associate agreements that have no provisions like that in them. If you're pulling one off the internet, it wasn't written to protect you. It's just a form,
Yeah.
That's what unfortunately a lot of people use.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this has been an amazingly telling conversation and revealing a lot of potential weaknesses in a lot of people's armor. I guarantee it, because I see it all the time, and I see it, even in my wife's company, where they probably have to tighten some things down, because everybody thought that working remotely was just going to be temporary, a month or 2, 3, and we'll be back. It's not. It's protracted now, but it's going to continue for many people as part of their permanent way they do business. So we
Right.
now have to look at re-gearing, re-engineering what we do and the way we do it to accommodate a ever-expanding remote workforce. So, I think we're at the end of our time here. I want to honor our listeners and certainly honor Ericka's time as well. I want to maybe open to some final comment that you might have that you'd like to make sure that our listeners hear from you, Ericka.
I think it's just important to really just think through all of your procedures when it comes to how you're operating your practice, not just in HIPAA, but in any of the requirements that a practice is supposed to meet. And a lot of it is logic and putting things in writing and continuously training. And I think most people intend to do well, and it's really just a matter of supporting them. And this isn't just, it's a time of opportunity as well, new and better ways of doing things, improving on what you did before, and finding those shortcomings and correcting them. And not just in HIPAA, but in all of the different types of businesses we talked about. You're right, the world's not going to be the same. So, let's just make it the best that it can be.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. Well said. Ike?
Well, I'm glad Ericka was able to join us and share so many specifics. I think it's given lots of the people that we speak to and work with, hopefully, some things to think about and some checklists. We've been fortunate that we've gotten some very specific details to look at. I'll be incorporating a lot of these things into the advice that I'm giving my clients. And in fact, I have sort of a questionnaire that I use when I talk to any new client about asset protection planning. And that questionnaire includes how many people work for you, and do you have a custom drafted employment manual, and do you have these 4 or 5 specific 6 types of specialty business liability insurance. What's getting added to all of my questionnaires today is, do you have a remote workforce?
Yep.
And a policy for that.
We're going to have to start asking more detailed questions. And look, in my role, I can't be an expert in every single issue, but I can surround myself with experts like Ericka, who can train me to ask the right questions. And that's what our business owners need to do to survive and continue to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. It's interesting, because you're right. I'm going to do the same thing. We need to understand if our clients have a remote workforce, and how they're protecting the information that could be very, very a very big liability to them. Because again, as I said before, ignorance is no excuse. Why didn't know? Nobody cares if you didn't know. You should have known. It's your job. It's your business. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to Ericka, and we appreciate you being with us today. Your contact information will be on a slide at the end of this presentation. If anybody has questions, we encourage them to reach out to you directly. You are an expert in this area, and same with Ike. Ike, our information is always at the end, and we encourage people to reach out. Don't be naive. Don't be uninformed. We have a little graphic on one of our way earlier posts when we first started this program almost 20 weeks ago, of a person on an island by themselves. And that's not where you want to be today. You don't want to be on an island by yourself and just, I don't know, it's just sit here and wait. No, you can't. I mean, there's things out there that can get you, and there's things that can help you. And we certainly want to help people understand what their options are so they can make the most informed, balanced decisions and move forward in their business, maybe beyond where they ever were before, because we're seeing some amazing, amazing businesses growing out of this pandemic. And yeah, we've also seen some liabilities with people that just didn't know and they got bit, and now they're paying the price. So with that, I will say thank you to everybody for joining us again on Business in the New Normal. We really appreciate your support. Tag your friends with this. If you're on LinkedIn or you're checking this out on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. We're here for you. There's no cost to any of this. We're just providing you with information that's helpful to you and those around you. So, send it off to your friends. Check us out every week. We really appreciate you joining us today. And for Ericka Adler, my co-host Ike Devji, I'm Joseph Rosales. Thank you and have an outstanding week.